Tonight we're diving into the quiet life of the world's first accountant. Picture this. You're standing in the middle of Uruk, around 3400 BCE, surrounded by mud brick houses and bustling markets where traders haggle over grain and goats. The air is thick with dust, sweat, and the occasional whiff of something vaguely fermented. You look down at your hands, calloused from years of pressing symbols into wet clay, and realize that you, my friend, are not just any ancient Mesopotamian citizen. You are a scribe. The original number cruncher. The very first person to ever etch numbers into a tablet and call it a day's work. Now, let me be clear, you probably won't survive this story without nodding off once or twice. I mean, accounting isn't exactly known for its high-octane drama, right? But stick with me. This isn't just about tallying up barley sacks and temple donations. This is the origin story of civilization as we know it. Without you, the humble record keeper, there would be no trade, no taxation, no way to tell whether your neighbor was skimming off the top of the grain supply. You are history's unsung hero, scribbling away while empires rise and fall around you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and local time. Just imagine someone in Tokyo reading this while drinking tea, and someone in Cairo yawning through their third cup of Arabic coffee. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand there, freshly trained, holding a stylus in one hand and a damp clay tablet in the other. Around you, merchants shout, priests chant, and children chase each other through the dirt streets. But none of that matters. Your job starts now. A farmer has just delivered his harvest, and you need to record how much wheat he brought in. Simple enough, right? Except nothing is simple when you're dealing with early writing systems. There's no alphabet yet, just pictographs pressed into clay with careful precision. A circle might mean 10, a line could mean 1, and if you mess up the order, well, good luck explaining to the temple priests why their records don't add up. Historians still argue whether these early symbols were purely numerical or carried additional meaning. Some say they represented both quantity and item type, others insist they evolved separately. Either way, you don't have time to worry about scholarly debates. You press the stylus into the clay, making neat impressions, trying not to smudge anything. Sweat drips down your brow not just from the heat, but from the pressure of accuracy. One mistake, and someone might go hungry, or worse, accuse you of fraud. This is the birth of writing, not poetry, not prayers, but bookkeeping. The earliest known tablets, found in the ruins of Uruk, weren't epic tales of gods and heroes. They were receipts. Lists of livestock, grain, beer, and labor. Mundane? Absolutely. Revolutionary? Without question. Because once you start recording things, you can track, predict, and control. And in a society where power comes from resources, that makes you more important than you might think. As you finish your first entry and set the tablet aside to dry, you glance around. The sun is beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city. Tomorrow will bring more deliveries, more transactions, more numbers to record. But for now, you exhale slowly, satisfied in the knowledge that even though no one will remember your name, your work is shaping the future. Every empire that rises, every economy that grows, owes something to people like you, quiet, meticulous, and utterly indispensable. You trudge through the streets of Uruk, your arms loaded with freshly pressed clay tablets. The weight is deceptive, each one feels heavier than it should, maybe because you know what they represent: control, order, and the fragile balance of civilization itself. The sun has fully set now, and the city glows with the warm flicker of oil lamps. You pass by a group of traders arguing over the price of copper ingots, their voices rising and falling like the tide. Somewhere nearby, a donkey brays in protest as it's urged along by its handler. You make your way to the temple complex, where scribes like yourself are housed and trained. The ziggurat looms above you, its towering form silhouetted against the night sky. Inside, the air smells of damp earth and burning oil. A senior scribe nods at you as you enter, barely glancing up from his own work. You find a small space on the floor, settle down cross-legged, and begin inspecting the tablet you just finished. The impressions are clear, the symbols precise, but you double-check anyway. Mistakes here mean more than crossed-out words. They mean confusion, disputes, even accusations of theft. Clay and commerce go hand in hand in this world. There's no paper, no ink, only the soft, malleable mud that dries into stone-hard permanence. Every transaction leaves a mark, not just on society but on physical objects that will outlast lifetimes. Trade is growing more complex every year. Merchants travel farther, carrying goods from distant lands, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, timber from Lebanon, tin from unknown places. With each new route comes the need for better record-keeping. And that's where you come in. You pick up another tablet, this one already half-filled with entries. It details the movement of barley shipments between villages, noting how much was sent, who received it, and when. Some records are simple, just numbers and names. Others require explanations, why a shipment arrived late, why a certain amount was missing, why a trader refused payment in goats. These notes become legal documents, binding agreements that hold people accountable. Without them, trade would collapse into chaos. A quirky thing about these early records: they're often sealed inside hollow clay envelopes. That's right, you write something important, then encase it in another layer of clay, baking it until it hardens like pottery. If someone ever questions the original entry, the sealed version serves as proof. It's like an ancient version of a tamper-proof ledger. Except instead of encryption, you use fire. Historians still argue whether these clay envelopes were meant to protect the contents from damage or from dishonesty. Maybe both. Either way, you know the stakes. People rely on these records, and if you mess up, you'll hear about it. Not just from your superiors, either merchants, priests, and even farmers have been known to demand answers when the numbers don't add up. You press your stylus into the next blank space, ready to record another exchange. This time, it's a shipment of wool arriving from the north. You note the number of bundles, the name of the trader, and the date, well, sort of. Dates aren't standardized yet. Sometimes you count years based on the reign of a ruler, sometimes you track them by major events like floods or harvests. It's not perfect, but it works well enough. As you finish, you glance around the room. Other scribes are deep in concentration, their hands moving methodically across tablets. Some mutter numbers under their breath, others hum softly, almost like a lullaby. It's strange how such a mundane task can feel so sacred. You're not just keeping track of goods, you're preserving history, shaping the future. One symbol at a time. You step into the temple's inner sanctum, where the air is thick with incense and the weight of divine expectation. The ziggurat looms above you, its mud brick walls baked by the sun and worn smooth by time. Priests in flowing robes move silently through the corridors, their eyes fixed on unseen duties. This place isn't just a center of worship, it's the beating heart of Uruk's economy. Every grain silo, every herd of sheep, every laborious ration flows through these halls. And as an accountant of the temple, you are its quiet gatekeeper. The temple owns everything. Not just land and livestock, but people too, though not in the way you might think. Slaves, yes, but also priests, workers, and even entire families who serve the gods in exchange for sustenance. Everything they produce belongs to the deity, which means it belongs to the temple. Your job? Keeping track of it all. Tithes come in from farmers, merchants, and craftsmen, each offering a portion of their goods in devotion. Some give willingly, others less so, but either way, the numbers must be precise. You make your way down a narrow hallway, past rows of storage rooms filled with towering jars of oil, sacks of barley, and bundles of dried fish. The scent is earthy, rich with fermentation and preservation. A scribe ahead of you lifts a clay tablet and calls out measurements as he records them. You nod in acknowledgement, then continue toward the central ledger chamber. There, beneath the flickering glow of oil lamps, the most important records are kept: lists of offerings, debts owed to the temple, wages distributed to laborers, and the ever-growing tally of surplus. A priest approaches, his hands stained with the dark residue of crushed myrrh. He holds out a small pouch, its contents clinking softly. "Silver tithes," he says simply. You take the pouch and weigh it against a set of stone scales, noting the amount before pressing the figure into a fresh clay tablet. Silver isn't currency yet, not in the way you'd recognize, but it serves as a unit of value, used to standardize trade between distant cities. 1 shekel of silver equals a certain number of bushels of wheat, or a length of fine wool. Without these conversions, commerce would spiral into confusion. You glance at another scribe who's tallying a shipment of beer. It's one of the more unusual tithes, but hardly unexpected. Beer is both food and currency here, often used to pay workers for their daily labor. In fact, some of the earliest known wage records come from temples like this one, detailing how much beer each worker received based on their role. A builder gets more than a cleaner, a foreman more than a porter. It's a system that keeps everyone fed, hydrated, and productive. Historians still argue whether the temple's control over resources was purely religious or if it served as an early form of centralized governance. Either way, you know what it feels like to live under its watchful eye. There's no room for error here. If a single entry goes missing, someone will notice. And if discrepancies pile up, accusations can fly faster than a startled pigeon. As you press the final symbol into your tablet, a young apprentice rushes in, breathless and wide-eyed. He holds up a broken piece of clay, clearly torn from a larger record. "It doesn't match," he stammers. "The barley count, something's wrong." You take the fragment, studying the impressions carefully. A discrepancy. Not unheard of, but never welcome. Someone may have made an honest mistake, or worse, tried to hide something. You sigh, setting your own tablet aside. Tonight, sleep will have to wait. There's work to do. You stand at the edge of a bustling construction site, the air thick with dust and the rhythmic thud of workers shaping mud bricks. Before you rises the skeletal form of a new ziggurat, its towering steps destined to scrape the sky and house the gods themselves. But before any deity takes residence, it needs builders, laborers, and overseers, hundreds of them. And someone has to make sure they all get paid. That someone is you. A foreman approaches, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "We need wages tallied," he says, holding out a tablet covered in hastily pressed symbols. You take it, scanning the entries, names, job titles, days worked, rations issued. It's your job to cross-reference this with the temple's records and ensure that no one is shortchanged or overpaid. A mistake here means either angry workers or an audit that could cost you your position. Neither option sounds particularly appealing. You retreat to a shaded corner near the construction site, where a small table has been set up for scribes like yourself. The sun beats down mercilessly, but you've learned to work through the heat. With stylus in hand, you press into fresh clay, calculating totals based on the standard daily wage. Workers earn their keep in barley, oil, wool, and sometimes silver, though as you well know, actual coins won't exist for centuries yet. Payment comes in weight rather than metal, measured carefully against stone scales. One thing you've noticed over time, not all jobs are valued equally. A skilled mason earns more than a common porter, just as a weaver earns more than a field hand. There's even a hierarchy within labor itself. Overseers receive extra rations for managing teams, while apprentices get only enough to survive until they prove their worth. It's a system built on necessity, efficiency, and control. Historians still argue whether these early wages were truly money in the modern sense or simply structured barter. Either way, they serve the same function: keeping people fed, motivated, and working toward a common goal. Without reliable payment, the ziggurats wouldn't rise, the granaries wouldn't fill, and the city would grind to a halt. As you finish your calculations, a worker steps forward, arms crossed. "I was told I'd get an extra measure of barley for working 2 shifts, he grumbles. You glance at the tablet again, then back at him. Sure enough, his name is there, but the additional tally is missing. Someone made a mistake, whether intentional or not, you can't say. You correct the record quickly, pressing in the missing number before handing the tablet back to the foreman. The worker nods in satisfaction and trudges off to collect his due. This is how accounting shapes civilization, not through grand gestures or heroic deeds, but through quiet diligence. Every entry you make ensures that food reaches mouths, tools reach hands, and projects stay on track. It's not glamorous work, but without it, chaos would reign. A quirky fact about ancient wages: some records indicate that workers were occasionally fined for poor performance. If a builder messed up a bricklayer, he might lose half his ration for the day. Talk about pressure. No room for mistakes when your dinner depends on it. You stretch your stiff fingers, feeling the ache from hours of writing. Another day of numbers, another day of balance. The ziggurat will stand because you made sure every man got what he earned. And though no one will remember your name, the stones will bear silent witness to your precision. You sit in the dimly lit chamber of the temple's records hall, surrounded by stacks of clay tablets, some freshly baked, others cracked with age. The oil lamps flicker low, casting long shadows across the room as a cool breeze sneaks through the narrow windows. You're deep into your work when a commotion erupts outside, drawing your attention. A group of priests and guards march in, dragging a man between them. His wrists are bound with rough rope, and his face is pale with fear. Your stomach tightens. You've seen this before. The man is brought before the high scribe, who sits at the head of the chamber like a judge upon a throne. "Fraud," one of the guards announces, tossing a broken tablet onto the table. "Embezzlement from the grain stores." You lean forward instinctively, heart pounding. This is no small matter. The temple's granaries hold the lifeblood of Uruk. Without proper accounting, famine could follow. And now, someone has tampered with the records. The accused stammers, eyes darting around the room. I swear, I only took what was owed to me," he pleads. But the high scribe doesn't flinch. He picks up the broken tablet and holds it up for all to see. The impressions are smudged in places, numbers altered or erased entirely. Someone tried to cover their tracks. Historians still argue whether fraud was common in these early bureaucracies or if most scribes were honest stewards of the system. Either way, when corruption surfaced, the consequences were swift and brutal. The high scribe turns to you. "Verify the original record." You nod, already reaching for the sealed clay envelope that contains the unaltered version. With careful hands, you crack open the hardened casing and retrieve the intact tablet within. As you compare the 2 entries, your stomach drops. The discrepancy is clear. The accused had recorded fewer deliveries than actually arrived, pocketing the difference over weeks. A murmur spreads through the room. The verdict is already decided. The man is dragged away, his protests fading into the corridors of the temple. Later, you'll hear whispers of what happens next: public flogging, exile, or worse. There's no prison in Uruk, no jail cells to house criminals. Justice is swift, visible, and meant to serve as warning to anyone else who might consider skimming from the ledgers. You return to your own work, but your hands tremble slightly as you press symbols into clay. You know the stakes now more than ever. Numbers don't lie, but people do. And when they do, the weight of truth rests on your shoulders. This wasn't the first case of embezzlement, nor will it be the last. In fact, some of the oldest known legal cases come from Mesopotamia, where disputes over missing grain or misrecorded payments ended in courtrooms filled with judges, witnesses, and sworn oaths. Accounting may have begun as a tool for trade, but it quickly became a shield against deception. A quirky thing about ancient fraud. Some records suggest that scribes were occasionally bribed with beer to alter figures. It's hard to imagine someone trying to buy off an accountant with alcohol, but hey, if it worked once, it probably worked more than once. You shake your head, trying to dispel the tension. Tonight, sleep will be elusive, but tomorrow, the numbers will still be waiting. And so will those who try to manipulate them. You sit cross-legged on the packed earth floor of a modest home, the flickering glow of an oil lamp casting long shadows across the room. The air is thick with the scent of barley bread baking in a clay oven and the faint tang of sweat from a day's labor. Around you, a small family gathers, parents, children, perhaps a grandparent or two, all watching as you carefully unseal a clay envelope. Inside is a tablet recording their household's grain rations for the coming season. This isn't temple work. This is personal. You press your stylus into a fresh slab of damp clay, making careful impressions that will serve as the family's ledger. Unlike the vast records kept by the temple, these are intimate affairs, tracking how much barley each member receives, how many goats they own, whether debts to neighbors have been settled. It's accounting on a human scale, where numbers mean survival rather than empire. The father leans forward, his calloused hands resting on his knees. "We gave 2 measures to the neighbor last month," he says. "Did he return them?" You scan the tablet again. Yes, he did. A simple entry confirms it. The man exhales in relief, nodding to his wife. Trust is important here, but memory is fallible. A written record ensures fairness, even among kin. Historians still argue whether these domestic ledgers were common among ordinary families or reserved only for wealthier households. Either way, you've seen enough to know that even the humblest homes understand the value of keeping track. A missed payment, a forgotten debt, a disputed harvest share without records, disputes can spiral into feuds that last generations. You move on to another section of the tablet, detailing food distribution. The eldest son gets more than the younger ones. The mother and father receive equal shares. The grandmother, too old for heavy labor, still eats her fill. It's not just about fairness, it's about ensuring everyone survives until the next harvest. A quirky thing about ancient rationing? Some tablets show families giving extra portions to favored children or withholding food as punishment. Accounting wasn't always neutral, it could be wielded like any other tool, for control as much as clarity. As you finish the final symbol, the mother brings over a bowl of stew, offering it with a tired smile. You accept gratefully, savoring the warmth. There's something grounding about this work, no towering ziggurats, no high priests demanding perfection. Just people trying to make ends meet, one measured grain at a time. You glance around the room. The children watch you with wide eyes, fascinated by the way you shape symbols into meaning. One of them tugs at your sleeve. "Will my name be on the tablet?" he asks. You smile, pressing his tiny finger into the soft clay beside the entries. A mark of presence. Proof that he existed, even if no one else ever reads this record. Tomorrow, you'll return to the temple, where the stakes are higher and the consequences harsher. But tonight, you're just a scribe in a quiet home, helping a family keep track of their world. You stand in the shadow of a throne, your stylus poised above a freshly prepared clay tablet as the king's advisors debate loudly around you. The chamber is vast and dimly lit, its walls adorned with carvings of past conquests and divine blessings. A heavy curtain flutters slightly from a draught, letting in a sliver of daylight that contrasts sharply with the oppressive gloom inside. You're not here for the politics, you're here for the numbers. The king himself sits before you, his expression unreadable beneath the weight of his ceremonial headdress. He gestures impatiently toward the table where you've laid out the latest inventory reports. "Tell me," he says, voice low but firm, "how much grain do we have stored across the kingdom?" You take a breath, steadying yourself. This isn't just another tally, it's the difference between stability and starvation. If the reserves are sufficient, the kingdom can withstand drought or war. If they fall short, famine looms, and with it, unrest. You press your stylus into the clay, carefully recording the figures as you speak. In the central granaries alone, we hold over 12,000 bushels. You begin, referencing the temple records you verified only days ago. Regional stores add another 8,000, though some provinces report lower than expected yields due to flooding. A murmur spreads through the gathered nobles. The king frowns. "Flooding again," he mutters. "How many times must we rebuild those dikes?" You don't answer. That's not your job. Your job is to ensure that when decisions are made, whether about taxation, military campaigns, or grain distribution, they're based on accurate data. And right now, that data shows a troubling trend. While the core cities remain well-fed, the outer provinces are struggling. Historians still argue whether these early royal audits were meant to maintain control or genuinely assist the people. Either way, you know the truth, numbers don't lie, but they can be manipulated. And if a ruler sees weakness in the accounts, someone will pay the price. A scribe beside you unrolls a second tablet, detailing livestock counts. Cattle herds have grown by 10% since last season, he notes. But sheep numbers have declined due to disease. The king nods, absorbing the information. These aren't just economic concerns, they're strategic ones. More cattle mean more plowing power, more meat, more leather. Fewer sheep mean less wool, fewer offerings to the gods. A quirky thing about ancient rulers: some kings kept personal ledgers, tracking their own wealth separate from state funds. Imagine that, a monarch double-checking his silver stash like a suspicious merchant. It speaks volumes about how deeply accounting had woven itself into governance. You glance at the high priest standing nearby, his fingers idly tracing the edge of his staff. Religious offerings also factor into this audit, and you know better than to understate them. Temples receive their share of grain, livestock, and labor, and if the gods feel neglected, the priests won't hesitate to remind the king. You finish your final entry and set the tablet aside. The meeting continues, voices rising and falling in argument, but your part is done. For now, the king has the facts. Whether he acts wisely or selfishly is beyond your control. As you exit the chamber, stepping into the warm embrace of sunlight, you exhale slowly. Another day of balancing books, another day of keeping an empire running. Not with swords or prayers, but with careful hands and precise impressions pressed into clay. You march alongside the army, your sandals kicking up dust with every step. The sun beats down mercilessly, turning the landscape into a shimmering blur of heat and exhaustion. Around you, soldiers trudge forward in tight formation, their bronze-tipped spears glinting in the light. Supply carts groan under the weight of grain sacks, amphorae of oil, and bundles of dried fish. This isn't just a military campaign, it's a logistical nightmare. And that's where you come in. You carry a small satchel of clay tablets, each one carefully sealed to protect against damage. These aren't battlefield strategies or heroic speeches, they're ledgers, inventories, expense reports. Someone has to make sure the army doesn't run out of food before it reaches its destination, or worse, mutiny because their rations have vanished somewhere along the way. A general rides past on horseback, his armor catching the sunlight like a warning flare. He nods at you briefly, then calls out an order to his officers. You keep walking, scanning the horizon. The enemy city lies days away, but your war began the moment the first supply wagon rolled out of the palace gates. You stop beside a group of porters unloading a cart. "Report," you say, holding out your stylus. One of them hands you a tablet, already half filled with entries. You read through it quickly. 20 measures of barley issued yesterday, 5 amphorae of oil remaining, 3 goats slaughtered for tonight's meal. It's all there except for one thing. "Where's the copper ration?" you ask. The porter hesitates. "Delayed back at the last checkpoint," he says. "Something about missing seals." You frown. Missing seals mean unverified shipments, which means the goods could be stolen, misplaced, or even fraudulently rerouted. In wartime, every delay matters. Soldiers don't fight well on empty stomachs. You press a new entry into a fresh tablet, noting the discrepancy before handing it off to another scribe who will relay the issue to the supply commander. If they can't recover the lost copper, the army might have to halt its advance until replacements arrive. And no one wants to wait when an enemy stronghold is within striking distance. Historians still argue whether ancient armies used standardized weights and measures across different regions or if local variations caused frequent disputes. Either way, you've learned to carry your own set of calibrated stones just to double-check everything yourself. Trust, after all, is not a luxury afforded to accountants in the field. A quirky thing about military logistics. Some records suggest that generals sometimes paid soldiers with grain instead of silver, especially when campaigns lasted longer than expected. Imagine getting your paycheck in bushels of wheat instead of coins. Not exactly easy to carry around, but at least you wouldn't starve. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, you find a quiet spot near the campfires and settle onto the ground. A junior scribe joins you, holding out a tablet covered in hastily pressed symbols. "Supplies from the southern route," he explains. "They arrived late, but intact." You scan the numbers, comparing them to your previous records. Everything adds up, at least for now. You press your stylus into the clay, marking the update before setting the tablet aside. Tomorrow will bring more calculations, more disputes, more delays. But for tonight, the army eats. You glance around the camp. Fires flicker in the growing darkness, casting long shadows over tents and weapons alike. Soldiers laugh, sharpen blades, whisper about home. Somewhere nearby, a man hums a tune so softly it almost blends into the wind. You lean back, exhaling slowly. War may be fought with swords and shields, but it's won or lost with numbers. You sit beneath the shade of a date palm, the midday sun beating down on the city's packed dirt streets. A merchant leans across the low table between you, his fingers drumming impatiently against the edge of a clay tablet. "I need the silver today," he says, voice tight with urgency. The shipment leaves at dusk. You glance at the record in front of you, another loan agreement, carefully pressed into damp clay before being baked to permanence. The terms are clear: 50 shekels of silver borrowed, to be repaid with interest after the goods reach their destination. Standard practice, but always risky. If the caravan fails, if bandits strike or storms delay the journey, the borrower may not have the means to repay. And then comes the hard part. You press your stylus into the tablet, adding the final notation, a 10% interest rate. It's steep, but necessary. Risk demands reward, and in a world without banks or paper money, lending is a gamble as much as it is business. Some records from centuries later suggest that interest rates could go as high as 33% for particularly dangerous ventures. That's not just a fee, that's survival insurance. The merchant nods, satisfied. He seals the deal with a quick imprint of his personal cylinder seal, rolling it over the soft clay so the tiny carved figures leave their mark. Proof of agreement. Proof of debt. Historians still argue whether these early loans were meant to support trade or serve as tools of social control. Either way, they shape lives. A successful loan can make a merchant rich. A failed one can ruin him entirely. A quirky thing about ancient finance. Some tablets show evidence of early bankruptcy proceedings. If a borrower couldn't repay, he might lose property, livestock, or even family members. Yes, in some cases, unpaid debts could lead to servitude. Not exactly what modern lenders would call ethical, but effective in its own brutal way. You set the completed tablet aside and reach for another. This one details a dispute between two traders. One claims he never received the full payment for his goods, while the other swears he paid in full. Without a written contract, there's no way to know who's telling the truth. That's why more and more merchants are turning to scribes like you to create legal proof of every transaction. As you work, a familiar figure approaches, robes dusted with the grit of travel. Another lender, this one older, with sharp eyes and a calculating smile. "I hear you handle contracts well," he says, lowering himself onto the ground beside you. "I have something new, long-term investment." Your eyebrows lift slightly. Long-term? That's unusual. Most loans here are short-term affairs, tied directly to trade cycles. Borrow silver, buy goods, sell them elsewhere, repay with profit. But long-term? That implies something bigger. Land, perhaps. Or maybe a joint venture between multiple investors. You listen as he explains. A group of traders wants to fund an expedition beyond the Zagros Mountains, where rumors speak of rare metals and exotic spices. The journey will take months, possibly years. There's no guarantee of return, but if it succeeds, the rewards could be immense. You press the first symbols into a fresh tablet, already calculating risks. Interest rates will have to be higher. Collateral must be specified. And above all, someone has to keep track of every shekel invested and every promise made. This is how economies grow, not through conquest or divine favor, but through careful calculations pressed into clay. Numbers that bind people together, that turn strangers into partners, that make wealth move like water through the veins of civilization. You finish the first line of the contract and glance up at the waiting merchant. "Let's begin," you say, pressing the stylus deeper into the clay. You stand ankle deep in the muddy remains of what used to be a thriving field, your sandals squelching with every step. The scent of damp earth and rotting grain fills the air, thick and unrelenting. Around you, farmers wade through the sludge, their faces hollow with exhaustion and disbelief. What was supposed to be a bountiful harvest is now a waterlogged ruin. The river has flooded again. It's not the first time, and it won't be the last. Every year, the great waters rise, bringing both life and destruction. When they behave, they nourish the soil, ensuring that barley and wheat grow strong. But when they swell too much, entire villages are swallowed, crops lost, homes swept away. And when that happens, someone has to tally the damage. That someone is you. A local overseer approaches, his robes soaked and streaked with mud. He holds out a broken tablet, its symbols smeared by moisture. "Half the silo collapsed," he says grimly. "We lost at least 20 measures." You nod, already reaching for a fresh slab of clay. You press in the date, or rather, the year according to the current ruler's reign, and begin recording the losses. Name of the village, amount of grain destroyed, number of damaged storage jars. It's all part of the process. Without records, there's no way to assess how bad things really are. No way to request aid from the temple or redistribute remaining supplies fairly. Historians still argue whether these early flood records were purely economic or served as omens interpreted by priests. Either way, you know the truth: when nature strikes, numbers don't stop being important. If anything, they become even more crucial. You glance toward the distant ziggurat, where scribes like yourself will soon gather to compile the damage reports from across the region. The temple needs accurate figures to determine how much grain can be spared from central reserves. Too little, and people starve. Too much, and the city weakens itself. It's a delicate balance, one measured in shekels and survival. A quirky thing about ancient flood accounting? Some tablets show evidence of rain insurance of sorts, early forms of risk management where farmers contributed surplus grain during good years so that stores could be tapped during disasters. Not exactly modern crop insurance, but the principle holds. You save when you can, because you never know when the river might turn against you. As you finish your entry, a woman steps forward, holding a small child in her arms. Her eyes are tired, but sharp. "What happens now?" she asks. You hesitate. There's no easy answer. You've seen this before: families displaced, food rations stretched thin, disputes over who gets what. Accounting can track loss, but it can't bring back what's gone. Still, you offer what reassurance you can. "We'll record everything," you say gently. "The temple will help where it can." She nods slowly, then turns away, disappearing into the haze of wet dust and quiet despair. You exhale, pressing your stylus into another blank space. There's more work to do. More fields to survey, more families to account for. Nature may be unpredictable, but numbers remain constant. Even in the face of disaster, they provide structure, clarity, and the faintest hope that order can be restored. And so, you write on. You sit in the dim glow of an oil lamp, surrounded by a small gathering of family elders and merchants. The air is thick with incense and expectation as two families prepare to formalize their union not just through marriage, but through contracts, dowries, and shared ledgers. This isn't just a wedding, it's a financial arrangement that will bind households together for generations. A father steps forward, his hands clasped behind his back. The bride brings 5 measures of barley, he declares, voice steady. 3 goats, 1 silver shekel, and a set of fine wool garments. Across from him, the groom's father nods slowly. "And we offer a house plot near the temple, plus 2 years' worth of labor from our son." He gestures toward the young man standing beside him, who shifts uncomfortably under the weight of the transaction. You press your stylus into a fresh clay tablet, carefully recording each item. Marriage in Uruk is not just a personal affair, it's an economic pact, ensuring stability, inheritance, and resource distribution. Every gift, every promise, must be documented. Without written proof, disputes can erupt years later, tearing families apart. Historians still argue whether these early marriage contracts were meant to protect women or simply ensure property rights. Either way, you've seen enough tablets to know that women often had a say in financial matters, especially when they brought valuable assets to the table. Some records even show women owning land independently, managing trade goods, and negotiating their own dowries. A quirky thing about ancient weddings? Some contracts included clauses detailing what happens if the husband takes another wife. One tablet you once read specified that if the groom took a second wife within 5 years, he would owe double the original dowry. It was less about love and more about financial insurance. You glance at the bride, who stands quietly beside her mother. She watches the proceedings with careful eyes, knowing full well that today is not just about vows, it's about securing her future. If something goes wrong, if the marriage fails, she has legal recourse. Her dowry remains hers, and she can return to her family with her assets intact. As you finish the final entry, you hold up the tablet for both parties to see. They lean in, studying the symbols pressed into the soft clay. A cylinder seal is rolled across the bottom, a mark of agreement. Then, cups of beer are passed around, and the tension in the room begins to ease. This is how societies grow, not just through love, but through careful calculations. Marriages create alliances, strengthen trade networks, and redistribute wealth. And as an accountant, you are the silent witness to it all. Later, as the guests begin to disperse, you pack away your tablets and stylus. You'll deliver the finalized contract to the temple archives tomorrow, where it will be stored alongside thousands of others, proof that these people existed, that they made promises, and that those promises were kept on record. You step outside into the cool night air, exhaling slowly. Another contract sealed, another ledger balanced. In the distance, laughter floats through the streets, mingling with the quiet hum of life continuing on. And somewhere inside that newly formed household, a young woman reads over the tablet one last time, making sure everything is in order. You sit hunched over a clay tablet, your fingers stiff from hours of pressing symbols into damp mud. The air in the scribe school is thick with dust and the scent of baked bread. Someone must have left an offering for the gods again. Around you, other students mutter under their breath, repeating numbers and syllables like incantations. A tutor walks slowly between the rows of seated boys, his reed switch tapping lightly against his palm. This is not a place for the lazy or the easily distracted. You're one of the lucky ones, or perhaps one of the unlucky ones, chosen at a young age to become a scribe. Most children learn trades from their parents: farming, weaving, pottery. But you were handed over to the temple's education system, where days are spent memorizing hundreds of cuneiform symbols, practicing writing until your fingers blister, and reciting math problems until they come to you in dreams. The tutor stops beside you, peering down at your tablet. Line 3, he says simply. Your stomach tightens. You glance back at your work, scanning the symbols. Did you mix up the sign for 10 and 60? Or maybe you reversed the order of a multiplication problem? You hesitate too long. The reed switch taps sharply against your wrist, not hard enough to bruise, but enough to sting. Pay attention, the tutor warns. Numbers do not forgive carelessness. You nod quickly, biting your lip. Pain is a common companion here. Mistakes are met with swift corrections, and sloppiness earns extra hours of practice. Some say this harsh discipline is necessary. After all, the future of Uruk depends on accurate record-keeping. One misplaced number could mean disaster, misallocated grain, unpaid workers, even accusations of fraud. Historians still argue whether these schools were open only to the elite or if talented commoners could rise through the ranks. Either way, you know the truth: you didn't choose this life. It was chosen for you, and now there's no turning back. A quirky thing about scribe training: some tablets suggest that students copied texts so many times they developed calluses on their fingers, just like modern typists, except instead of keyboards, they used styluses and clay. You press harder into the tablet, correcting your mistake before moving on. Today's lesson is on division, which feels impossibly complicated when you're working with base 60 numbers and no zero placeholder. You scribble out another calculation, then pause as a sudden thought strikes you. What if you fail? It's not just embarrassment you risk, it's your future. Scribes hold power in Uruk, even if it's quiet, unseen power. They are trusted by kings, priests, and merchants alike. Without them, trade would collapse, taxes wouldn't be collected, and records would be lost to time. But if you don't master the craft, you'll be sent back to your family's trade, disgraced and useless in the eyes of those who once believed you had potential. The tutor moves on, and you exhale slowly, forcing yourself to focus. There will be no rest today. No breaks until the numbers make sense. And tomorrow, more lessons, more mistakes, more pain. But one day, you tell yourself, it will be worth it. One day, you'll hold a finished tablet in your hands and know, without doubt, that you created something lasting. And in a world built on grain, gold, and gods, that is more powerful than any sword. You sit alone in the temple archives, surrounded by rows of clay tablets stacked like bricks in the dim glow of an oil lamp. The air is thick with dust and silence, broken only by the occasional scuff of your stylus pressing into soft clay. Around you, the weight of history presses down not just in the records themselves, but in the lives they represent. Every entry you make today will outlive you. But will anyone remember you? That's the question that haunts every scribe. Some of your colleagues dream of recognition. They imagine their names etched into stone, their works cited in royal decrees, their calculations quoted by future generations. Others are content with quiet purpose, knowing that without them, the world would spin into chaos. You've never decided which path you prefer. A senior scribe once told you a story about a man who kept perfect records for the palace. His ledgers were so precise, his audits so thorough, that he was granted a place in the king's court, a rare honor for someone of your profession. 4 years, he was praised, rewarded, even given land. But after he died, no monument was built in his name. No statue carved to preserve his likeness. Just more tablets, more numbers, more forgotten effort. You glance at the tablet in front of you. It details the grain distribution for the upcoming harvest season. A simple task. Necessary, yes, but hardly heroic. If you do it right, no one notices. If you do it wrong, accusations fly. There's little middle ground in your work. Historians still argue whether scribes were considered high-status individuals or merely well-trained functionaries. Some tablets suggest that skilled accountants could rise to positions of influence, advising kings and managing vast estates. Others imply that most remained nameless bureaucrats, their contributions swallowed by time. A quirky thing about ancient record keepers: some scribes tried to immortalize themselves by adding personal notes to official documents. One tablet you once read included a brief aside: "I, Enlil Bani, pressed this tablet on the 3rd day of the month, under the reign of King Shulgi." It wasn't necessary for the record, but it was there proof that someone wanted to be remembered. You press your stylus into the clay again, finishing the final line of your report. Then, without thinking, you add a small mark in the corner, an imprint of your cylinder seal. Not because it's required. Not because anyone will see it. Just because you can. Maybe, centuries from now, when some other scribe uncovers this tablet buried beneath the ruins of Uruk, they'll wonder who you were. Did you keep good records? Were you fair? Did you matter? Probably not. But still, you leave your mark. Because deep down, every scribe wants to be seen, even if only in the silent language of numbers. You stand on the outskirts of Uruk, watching as the city's towering ziggurats fade into the distance. Smoke rises from distant fires, some from forges, some from homes, and others from something far less controlled. The empire is unraveling. 4 years, you've kept meticulous records: grain stores, trade routes, tax collections, military campaigns. You've pressed numbers into clay with careful precision, believing that order could hold civilization together. But now, as you look toward the horizon, you feel it slipping through your fingers like sand in a broken sieve. The signs have been building for some time. Droughts came first, weakening the fields. Then floods returned with vengeance, washing away what little remained. Trade slowed as merchants feared bandits or warlords who prowled the roads. Even the temple, once the unshakable heart of Uruk, feels the strain. Priests argue over dwindling offerings. Scribes whisper about disappearing tablets. And still, you write. But writing alone cannot stop an empire's fall. You walk through the streets one last time, past shuttered shops and empty granaries. The air smells different now, not of oil lamps and bread, but of desperation. Families huddle in doorways, their eyes hollow. A child tugs at your robe, asking if there's still barley to be had. You don't answer. Instead, You press a small token into her palm, a broken piece of an old tablet, its symbols worn smooth by time. It means nothing, really. Just clay and memory. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamia's decline was due to environmental collapse, political instability, or sheer exhaustion after centuries of rule. Maybe it was all of those things. Maybe it was inevitable. A quirky thing about fallen empires: their records often survive them. Long after rulers are forgotten, long after cities crumble, the numbers remain, pressed into clay, buried beneath dust, waiting for someone to find them again. You make your way to the scribe school, where students still practice their cuneiform under flickering lamps. They don't know what's coming. Or maybe they do, and they just refuse to believe it yet. One boy presses his stylus too hard into a tablet, cracking it in half. He looks up at you, startled, expecting a reprimand. Instead, you kneel beside him. "Keep going," you say gently. "Even if no one reads this tomorrow, it still matters today." He nods uncertainly, then returns to his work. You leave before he finishes the next line. Outside, the wind carries fine grains of dust through the streets, swirling around your feet like ghosts. You pass the temple one last time, noting how quiet it has become. No traders shouting at the gates, no priests offering blessings. Just silence. And then, you see it. A stack of tablets left abandoned near the steps, half buried in the dirt. Someone must have dropped them in haste. You kneel, brushing off the top layer, recognizing the familiar symbols pressed into the clay. Records of grain shipments, tax payments, marriage contracts, lives captured in lines and figures. You reach for one, tracing the impressions with your fingertips. Someone spent hours on this. Someone believed it was important. Someone like you. You hesitate, then gather the tablets into your arms. There's no reason to save them. The city may not last another season. But still, you carry them anyway. Because even when civilizations fall, the numbers remain. You sit in the quiet hush of a modern office, the glow of a computer screen casting soft blue light across your face. Outside, the city hums with life, cars passing, people talking, the distant wail of an ambulance. The world has changed 1,000 times over since Uruk rose from the dust, but here, at this desk, something remains familiar. Your fingers hover over the keyboard, and you press enter, finalizing another spreadsheet. Numbers stretch out before you like ancient symbols pressed into clay, columns of data, rows of calculations, formulas that ensure everything balances just right. It's not cuneiform, but it might as well be. The language has evolved, but the purpose hasn't. Somewhere deep inside, you feel a connection to those long-forgotten scribes who once sat cross-legged on temple floors, pressing their styluses into damp mud. They didn't know they were shaping history. They just did their work, day after day, believing that order mattered, that if they kept track of things, civilization could endure. And it did. You glance at the clock. Late again. But what else is new? Accountants don't punch out when the sun sets. You finish one last line of data, double-checking the figures before saving the file. No oil lamps here, no baked clay tablets, but the weight of responsibility remains the same. A misplaced decimal can still ruin a business. A misread entry can still cause chaos. Historians still argue whether the first accountants understood the magnitude of their work or if they simply saw themselves as record keepers. You suspect it was both. People have always needed structure, and numbers provide it better than anything else. A quirky thing about modern accounting: some companies still use physical ledgers for legal backups, just like the old temples once did. Digital records are fast and efficient, but paper or clay feels more permanent, more trustworthy. You lean back in your chair, rubbing your eyes. Somewhere across the globe, another accountant finishes their work, shutting down their laptop with a tired sigh. In Tokyo, maybe. Or Cairo. Or New York. Just like the scribes of Uruk, you're part of something vast, something unseen. You keep the world running, not with swords or speeches, but with careful hands and precise entries. Outside, the wind rustles through the trees, carrying with it the echoes of time. You think of those broken tablets buried beneath Mesopotamian sands, waiting centuries to be found. Someone, somewhere, will find them again. And when they do, they'll see the same thing you see every day: numbers that tell stories, that hold power, that shape lives. You saved the spreadsheet. Now, you close your laptop. Time to rest. The quiet of the room settles around you like a familiar blanket. You exhale slowly, letting your shoulders loosen, your breaths lengthen. The glow of the screen fades as your monitor goes dark, and in its place, the soft hum of the fan blends with the distant sounds of the city outside. It's late, but not too late, just quiet enough for the world to feel still, even if only for a moment. You lean back further in your chair, closing your eyes. And somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, you imagine those ancient hands pressing symbols into clay, their fingers moving with the same careful precision yours once had. You picture them sitting beneath oil lamps, just as you sat beneath LED lights, surrounded by records that would outlive them. They never knew their names would be forgotten, but they kept writing anyway. Because someone always has to keep track. And now, so do you. But tonight, you let go. The weight of numbers lifts, just slightly, as your thoughts drift, not toward audits or spreadsheets, but toward something simpler. Toward the slow turning of time, the way history folds itself into layers, each generation pressing its own symbols into whatever medium it finds. Clay, parchment, paper, pixels. One day, long after this screen has gone dark and these files have been archived into silence, someone will find what you left behind. Maybe they'll wonder who you were. Maybe they'll smile at the quirks of your formatting, or shake their head at an old Excel formula. Or maybe they won't think about you at all, they'll just read the numbers and move on. And that's okay. Because that's how it's always been. You shift in your seat, feeling the pull of sleep more strongly now. The past feels close, wrapped around you like a warm breeze from another time. Somewhere far away, in a land of dust and ruins, broken tablets wait beneath the earth, whispering to the future. And here, in this quiet room, you whisper back, "Good night."